The man had lived in Maple Hollow for many years, long enough to see children grow up, families move away, and houses change owners. But one thing that never seemed to change was the heavy hand of the HOA and the woman who ran it like a queen on a throne. Her name was Karen, and she had built her power not with kindness or service but with fines, warnings, and fear. At first he thought the rules were small things, harmless notices about lawn care, trash bins, or paint color, but as years passed, the rules multiplied like weeds. Every season brought a new restriction, every month brought another envelope, and every envelope carried the same smug signature. Karen's bold name stamped across the bottom with a fine attached. He remembered one spring when he was fined for having a flower bed that stood an inch taller than regulation. Another winter when she claimed his Christmas lights were too bright and disturbed the uniform look of the street. The man endured it as long as he could, paying some fines, ignoring others, and sometimes arguing only to find the board always sided with her. But each time he saw her on the street with her clipboard, checking houses and shaking her head, he felt the weight grow heavier until it pressed like a stone on his chest. One summer morning he opened his mailbox and found the thickest letter yet. Printed in bold red letters across the top were the words "Final Warning." He ripped it open and read slowly, his hands shaking. The violation was laughable. His truck had been parked in his own driveway for 2 nights in a row, and now the fine stood at nearly $1,000. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched, and in that moment something broke inside him. It was not just frustration anymore. It was a final decision. A certainty that he could not and would not live under her thumb one more day. He walked inside, sat down at his desk, pulled out a piece of paper, and began to write. The words came steady, his pen carving the decision he had carried in his heart for years. I hereby resign from the Homeowners Association of Maple Hollow. I will not pay further fees, nor will I comply with rules that have no legal weight. This is my home, my property, and I choose independence. He signed his name hard enough that the ink pressed through the page, scanned it, and sent it by email to every member of the HOA and every neighbor on the list. His finger hovered over the send button for only a second. Then he pressed, and just like that the chains he had carried for years felt lighter, the silence in his house deeper, almost like peace had returned. But peace was never something Karen allowed for long. Within an hour the whispers began. Neighbors passed by his house, some slowing to nod, some whispering quick words of thanks, others only staring in silence, afraid of what would happen next. But he did not care. He hadn't written it for them, he had written it for himself. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, there came the sharpest knock he had ever heard on his door. It rattled the glass and echoed through the house. He opened it slowly and there she stood, Karen, her face flushed red, her eyes burning, her clipboard clutched like a weapon, and in her hand a printed copy of his resignation letter. The paper crumpled from how tightly she gripped it. Her voice shot out instantly, high and sharp enough for the whole street to hear. You think you can just walk away? You think you can defy this community? You insulted me. You insulted us all, and you will regret this. Her words hissed like venom. Neighbors peeked from curtains. Some even stepped outside to watch. And he stood in the doorway calm as stone. His chest tight but his face unreadable. I didn't insult anyone. He said slowly, I chose peace. I chose to be left alone. She laughed then, sharp and cruel. Peace doesn't exist outside the rules. Independence doesn't exist outside order. Without me this place would rot, and you will not be the one to unravel it. She turned on her heel, her voice still echoing down the street. Threats about legal action, about police, about lawsuits, words meant to rattle him. But he only closed the door quietly and let the sound fade. Inside he poured himself a glass of water, sat back down at his desk, and whispered to himself, it has begun. Because deep down he knew she would not forgive this humiliation. And what he did not yet realize was that her plan for revenge would be bigger than fines or threats. She was going to call the cops, and she had no idea that the badge she thought would save her would belong to his son. The next day the air in Maple Hollow felt heavy even before the sun was high. The man stepped outside with his coffee, the wood of the porch warm beneath his feet, and he could already feel eyes on him from behind curtains and half-open doors. Word of his resignation had spread like fire through dry grass, everyone knew, and everyone waited to see what Karen would do. He did not wait long, because soon enough she came marching down the street with her usual stiff stride, her clipboard clutched to her chest, a bundle of papers under one arm, and her lips pressed tight in a scowl. Behind her trailed 2 board members who looked less like allies and more like hostages, their eyes cast down, their steps hesitant, Karen's heels struck the pavement hard, each click a warning shot. And as she reached the man's driveway, she raised her voice loud enough for all to hear. Neighbors leaned out on porches, children hushed, everyone listening. You think you can walk away? You think this letter means anything? Well, let me tell you something. Once you are part of this community, you are bound by our rules. There is no escape, and you are breaking the law by even trying. She jabbed a finger toward him, her voice sharp and shrill. You owe fines, you owe dues, and you will pay, you will comply, or I will make sure the police drag you off your porch like the criminal you are. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers broke out. Some neighbors shook their heads, others simply stared. The man stayed still, calm, his coffee untouched in his hand, his face steady, his eyes locked on hers. She hated the silence, hated how he did not tremble. She lifted the bundle of papers high. These are violations, dozens of them, every mistake you've made for years. I can take this to court tomorrow and bankrupt you. Her words spat like bullets, but the man only set down his cup and spoke in a voice low but clear. You can take whatever you want wherever you want, Karen, but I am not afraid of your papers anymore. I don't belong to your HOA, I don't belong to you. His words carried steady through the street, neighbors stiffened, their whispers louder now. Karen's face went red, her hands shaking. Don't you dare speak to me like that. Don't you dare defy me in front of them, she hissed, pointing to the crowd as if they were her soldiers. But no. One stepped forward. No one nodded. They only watched. She realized too late that the fear she depended on was cracking. She raised her phone high, her voice trembling with rage. Fine, if you will not obey, then I will call the police right now, and when they come, you will regret ever writing that letter. The man's eyes never wavered, his voice calm as stone. Call them. That simple phrase rolled heavy through the air. The crowd went silent, all eyes on her. And for the first time in years her power did not look untouchable. Her hand shook as she punched in numbers, the phone pressed to her ear, her face twisted with anger and pride, and the man simply folded his arms, waiting, because deep inside he knew this call would not end the way she believed, and Karen had no idea the storm she was inviting into her own house. The phone rang loud in the still summer air. The neighbors leaned closer without daring to move. Karen held it high on speaker so every ear could hear. Her face twisted with triumph as if she had already won. When the line clicked and the dispatcher answered with a calm voice, Karen wasted no time. Her words came sharp and fast. This is Karen Matthews, president of the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association. I am reporting a trespasser at one of our properties. A man refusing to comply with our rules. He is hostile and threatening. I demand immediate police response. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers flared. She's lying. She's calling him a trespasser in his own home. The man stayed still, his arms folded, his eyes fixed on her with a calm that made her grind her teeth. The dispatcher's voice came again, slow and steady. Can you confirm the address and your relationship to the property? Karen lifted her chin high, her voice rising. The property is located at 427 Sycamore Road. It falls under my HOA jurisdiction. And this man has no right to be there. He is breaking our laws. I want him removed immediately. Neighbors gasped louder, heads shaking, mutters of disbelief spreading. The board members behind her looked at the ground, ashamed but silent. Karen smirked, pleased with herself, her voice dripping arrogance. You better send someone fast, because this man is dangerous and refuses to obey. She pointed her finger at him again as if already handing him to the authorities. The man didn't flinch, didn't blink, only adjusted the folder under his arm. His silence unnerving her more than anger ever could. The crowd held its breath, every eye shifting between the phone and the man, waiting, the air so heavy it was as if the street itself had gone quiet. And then the dispatcher's voice carried clear through the speaker, a voice that struck like a blade through the tension. Mrs. Matthews, this is Officer Daniels, badge number 7431, County Sheriff's Department. Can you please repeat your claim clearly for the record? Karen blinked, her smile faltering. But she pushed forward louder. Yes, I am the HOA president and I am reporting this man for trespassing. He does not belong here. He has no rights to the cabin. He is defying HOA authority and threatening me. She spat the words with venom, expecting cheers, expecting obedience, but instead there was silence, a silence that stretched too long, and then came the reply, sharp, professional, and cold. That is interesting, Mrs. Matthews. Because the man you are accusing is my father. And the property you are calling about is legally deeded to him and my mother. Your statement sounds very much like a false report, which is a crime. Do you understand that? The street erupted, gasps and whispers colliding, neighbors covering mouths, eyes wide with shock. The board members froze, their faces draining pale. Karen staggered, the phone shaking in her hand. What? She stammered, her voice cracking. The officer's tone hardened. You are on a recorded line, and every word you've spoken will be reviewed. I suggest you stop now before you go further. Because false reports carry consequences. Laughter began to ripple through the crowd, nervous at first, then louder, some whispering, her bluff is finished. Others grinning wide. Karen's lips trembled, her eyes darting wildly from face to face, searching for support and finding none. Her pride collapsing in front of everyone. While the man stood calm on his porch, his eyes steady, his faint smile cutting deeper than any shout. And in that moment everyone knew the game had changed. Because the badge she thought would destroy him belonged to his son, and her call for power had turned into a noose tightening around her own neck. The crowd was frozen in place, every ear straining as the phone on speaker carried the calm but commanding voice of Officer Daniels. The son Karen never expected. His words rolled out like stone across the gravel road. Mrs. Matthews, for the record, state your full name, your position, and the reason you attempted to enter a property you do not own. Karen's eyes went wide, her face drained of color. The phone trembled in her hand. But pride forced her mouth open, her words spilling in a rush. I am Karen Matthews, HOA president of Maple Hollow, and I was enforcing compliance. This man changed his lock, he tampered with it. That is not allowed. I was ensuring community safety. Her voice cracked even as she tried to make it sound confident. But the neighbors weren't convinced. Their whispers rose. Safety, she means control. She broke his lock herself, one man muttered. We all saw the scratches. The officer's voice cut through the murmurs, sharper now. So you admit you attempted access to a private residence with a key that did not belong to you. Karen's eyes darted wildly, sweat beading at her forehead. No, it wasn't like that. I was making sure. I was just checking. Her excuses stumbled over themselves. The neighbors laughed bitterly. Her board members shifted uncomfortably, one muttering low. We told you this was too far. But she ignored them, her voice rising shrill. He doesn't belong here. This property is community property. I have the right. I make the rules. The officer's voice turned cold. You make nothing, Karen. You are a president of a voluntary association. You have no jurisdiction over private deeded property. County records show this land belongs to my parents. Not to you, not to your HOA, and certainly not to your false authority. You've been warned. Now answer the question. Did you or did you not attempt to use a master key on this man's lock? Karen's face twisted, her lips trembling. She tried to deflect. He changed the locks. That's why it didn't work. That's illegal. But the officer cut her off, his tone like iron. Illegal is what you did, Karen. Tampering with a door that does not belong to you. Filing a false report on a recorded line. And attempting to intimidate a homeowner with lies. These are crimes. Do you understand me? Crimes? The neighbors gasped. Some even cheered. Laughter spilled across the street. Finally someone said it. She's cornered. Children whispered excitedly. Karen shook her head violently, her hair sticking to her damp face. No, you don't get it. I am the authority here. Without me there's chaos. Without me there's no order. This community will fall apart. Her words turned desperate, almost pleading. But the neighbors shouted back, better no order than your rules. We don't need you. You lied to us for years. Karen's legs trembled, her knees bending slightly as if the weight of her humiliation pressed her down. She clutched the phone tighter, her eyes wild. No, you're supposed to protect me. I called for help. I'm the victim here. He's the trespasser. The officer's voice struck like a hammer. Enough, Karen. You called in a false report. You lied to law enforcement. And you harassed a man in his own home. This call is recorded, and this evidence will not disappear. If you continue to push this, I will file charges personally. Do you understand that? Personally. Silence fell heavy. The crowd stared, her face crumpled. The clipboard slipped from her arm and crashed to the porch. Papers scattering into the dirt. Neighbors laughed. Children stomped on them. Karen bent to pick them up, but her hands shook so bad she could barely grip them. The officer's voice echoed one last time, cold and final. Karen Matthews, Step away from that property, walk home, and pray we don't escalate this further. Because if you continue, the next voice you hear will be a deputy on your doorstep. Do you understand? Karen's lips moved but no sound came. The neighbors roared with laughter and jeers. Go home, Karen, your reign is over. You don't scare us anymore. Her power shattered. She stumbled down the steps, her face red and wet with sweat, her precious keys jingling useless at her side. Her shoulders hunched as the jeers followed her. The man stood silent on the porch, calm and unshaken, the phone steady in his hand. His son's voice had exposed everything, and the neighborhood that once lived under fear now saw the tyrant for what she was, small, broken, and powerless. The storm had turned, and everyone knew it. The street was silent except for the sound of Karen's ragged breathing, her hair clinging to her damp face, her hands trembling as she tried to gather the scattered papers at her feet. The neighbors were no longer whispering in fear. They were whispering in excitement, in disbelief, some laughing quietly, others muttering loud enough for her to hear. She's finished. Finally someone stood up to her, all these years, and she thought she was untouchable. The man stood steady on the porch, his arms folded across his chest, his face calm, his eyes fixed on her like stone, and the phone still sat in his hand, the speaker carrying his son's voice clear and sharp into the heavy air. For the record, this is Officer Daniels, badge number 7431, Maple County Sheriff's Department. I am the responding authority on this call, and I am also the son of the man you are attempting to harass. Mrs. Matthews, you are warned again. Filing a false report and attempting unlawful entry are criminal offenses, and if you continue your behavior I will file charges. The words cut through the crowd like thunder. Neighbors gasped, some clapped hands to their mouths, others shook their heads with wide eyes. One man laughed out loud and said, "Her worst nightmare is that the law is in his family," another muttered. The very badge she tried to use against him now turns against her. Karen froze. In place, the papers slipping from her fingers and fluttering back to the porch. Her mouth opened and closed but no words came. She shook her head violently, sweat rolling down her temple. No, no, this isn't right. This isn't legal. You can't be the one handling this. You're biased. You're his son. This is abuse of power. Her words cracked high-pitched, almost desperate. But the officer's voice came back colder, sharper. Biased or not, the law is the law, and the law says you cannot break into homes, you cannot harass residents, and you cannot lie to police. I am not protecting him because he is my father. I am protecting him because he is the homeowner and you are the criminal. Do you understand that? The crowd erupted with shouts, some neighbors clapping loudly, others laughing. One woman yelled from her porch. About time someone called her a criminal. Karen's face twisted, her pride tearing apart with every word. She dropped to her knees, scrambling for the keys that had slipped from her belt, trying to clutch them like they could save her. But the sound of the crowd's laughter drowned her out. The man finally moved, stepping down one step from his porch. His eyes locked on her as he held one of the keys between his fingers, letting it glint in the late sunlight, his voice calm but loud enough for all to hear. This is what she used to control us. This was her weapon, her so-called master key. She said it could open every door, but it failed here. It failed. Because she never had the right, and now you all see that. The neighbors gasped, then a cheer broke out, clapping, stomping, phones raised to record. Karen's eyes went wide, her lips trembling. No, don't listen to him. He forged everything. He tricked you. I am still president. I am still in charge. You need me. But her voice was drowned by the officer's voice cutting sharp again. You're not in charge of anything, Karen. The only thing you're in charge of now is explaining your lies to the sheriff when this recording is reviewed. You want to keep talking, go ahead. But every word is another nail in the coffin you built for yourself. Karen's knees buckled. She sank onto the step, her hands covering her face, the clipboard abandoned, the papers scattered, the once proud president now shaking in front of everyone. The neighbors roared louder. One shouted, "Your reign is over," another yelled, "You don't scare us anymore." The man stood tall, his son's voice steady on the phone. And in that moment the whole street knew the balance had shifted forever. The badge that Karen thought would destroy him had turned and crushed her, and the fear she had ruled with for years vanished like smoke in the wind. Karen sat slumped on the porch step, her once iron posture broken, her hands trembling as she tried to cover her face. But no amount of shaking could hide her from the eyes of the entire neighborhood. The crowd had swelled. People from the far end of Maple Hollow were walking down just to witness the scene. some holding their phones high, recording every second, others whispering angrily to one another. The air was no longer thick with fear like it once was when Karen's heels clicked against the road. It was charged with something different now: relief, rebellion, and anger boiling over after years of her tyranny. The phone still crackled in the man's hand, his son's voice steady. "Karen Matthews, you are still on a recorded line. Your false report has been logged. And your admission of trying a key on that lock is clear evidence of attempted unlawful entry. You need to leave this property now." The words echoed, and the neighbors repeated them under their breath. "Leave this property now." Almost chanting, Karen's head snapped up, her eyes wild, her lips trembling as she screeched, "You can't tell me to leave. This is my community. I built this place. I kept order. I wrote the rules. Without me this neighborhood would fall apart into filth, weeds, and trash." Her shrill words bounced off the houses, but instead of obedience, laughter met them. Bitter and sharp, one man from the back shouted, "Better weeds than you." Another woman yelled, "We'll mow our own lawns. We don't need your rules." Cheers followed, clapping, stomping, voices rising together. Karen spun in panic, her eyes darting from one face to another, desperately seeking support. But where once there were nods and fearful silence, now there was only defiance. The board members who had trailed behind her all morning finally broke away. One of them, a tall man with gray hair, stepped forward and raised his voice. "Enough, Karen, you've dragged us too far. We can't defend this anymore. You told us his property was under your control. But you lied. You told us the master key would work. But it didn't. You've humiliated us, and I'm done." The crowd gasped, then erupted in cheers. Karen's mouth opened, no words came, her face pale, her chest heaving. The second board member, a woman who had always followed her orders, shook her head slowly, her voice quiet but carrying. "We resign, Karen, all of us. You don't speak for us anymore." Karen staggered back like she'd been struck. No, you can't leave me. I am the president. I am the law here." But the words sounded weak, childish, and were drowned by the noise of neighbors laughing and shouting. The man finally stepped off his porch, calm and steady, his eyes locked on her, the leather folder still tucked under his arm, the useless master key glinting in his hand, his voice low but heavy. "You are not the law. Karen, you never were. You built power on fear, and fear breaks when truth is shown." The crowd roared, clapping, shouting, children ran into the street. One little boy picked up a crumpled violation notice and tore it in half. The people laughed and cheered louder. Karen's voice cracked into a scream. "Stop it, stop laughing, stop cheering, you're all fools, you'll regret this, you'll crawl back to me when everything falls apart." But her voice was lost in the chant that began to rise. "No. More HOA, no more HOA." The neighbors' voices rolled like thunder, drowning her shrieks. Her hands shook so violently that the keys slipped again, scattering into the dirt. A little girl ran up and kicked them into the gutter. The crowd burst into more laughter, and Karen dropped to her knees, clawing at the gravel, her nails scraping as she tried to gather what was left of her broken crown. The officer's voice came again through the phone, cold and final. "Karen Matthews, walk away now. This is your last warning. Next time we won't just be talking, there will be charges." Karen froze, the words hitting her harder than any jeer. Her eyes filled with tears, her shoulders shaking. She looked around one last time, hoping for mercy. But the neighbors' faces were cold, defiant, even joyful. No one feared her anymore. No one followed her anymore. She staggered to her feet, her hair a mess, her hands empty, her clipboard and her keys abandoned in the dirt. She stumbled backward, retreating. Down the street, the laughter and cheers chasing her with every step. The man stood tall in the center of it all, his son's voice still on the line. His neighbors now free of the chains they never realized they had the power to break. And as Karen disappeared into the distance, her empire of fear crumbled to dust behind her. The next morning the neighborhood felt different, the air lighter, the silence no longer heavy with Karen's watchful presence. But she was not done. Her pride would not allow her to vanish quietly, and by mid-morning her car crept down Sycamore Road, the same red sedan she always drove, stopping in front of the man's cabin. She stepped out with her hair messy, her face pale but her eyes blazing, clutching a clipboard with fresh papers. She marched like she still owned the street. But this time she was not met with silence or bowed heads. The neighbors poured out of their houses as if they had been waiting for her, some crossing their arms, others holding phones ready, and children sat on fences. their eyes wide with excitement. Karen raised the clipboard high and shouted, "This is not over. I am still the president, and you all are still bound by my rules. Every one of you owes me dues, every one of you must obey, and if you do not, I will see you in court." Her voice cracked and echoed, but instead of fear it sparked anger. The old man who had lived on the corner for decades stepped forward and shouted back, "You've taken our money for years. You lied about rules, you lied about authority, and now you dare threaten us again." The crowd cheered him on. Others stepped forward too, voices rising. "We don't owe you a thing. You forged half your violations. You bullied us for too long." Karen shook her head violently, waving the papers like weapons. "Without me this neighborhood will collapse. There will be chaos, weeds in the yards, trash in the streets, strangers moving in without approval. Everything will fall apart." But her voice was drowned out by laughter and jeers. One woman yelled, "Better weeds than your lies." Another neighbor added, "Better chaos than your control." The cheers grew louder, and Karen's face went red as she screamed, "You're fools, all of you. Fools who don't see that I kept you safe." Her words were desperate now, almost begging. But the people had already chosen. The board members who had once stood at her side now stepped forward too, their shoulders heavy with shame. One raised his hands and said loud enough for all to hear, "We resign, every one of us. No more meetings, no more fines. The board is dissolved." The crowd erupted in cheers, clapping, shouting, stomping their feet against the gravel. Karen spun toward them with fury, her hair wild. "You can't quit. You work for me. You obey me. I am the president." But her words sounded hollow. Her clipboard shook in her hands, and in a sudden motion the man stepped off his porch, walking slow and steady, his calm presence cutting through the noise. He stood in the center of the street and raised his voice, calm but commanding. "You hear them, Karen. You hear the people you claim to rule. They are done. They don't want your rules. They don't want your fear, and your power ends here." His words carried weight heavier than her screams. The neighbors cheered louder, some chanting, "No more HOA, no more HOA." Their voices thundered across the houses. Karen's eyes darted wildly. Panic clear in her trembling hands, she tried to lift her clipboard again. But one of the children darted forward and snatched it from her. Tossing it into the dirt, laughter roared through the crowd as papers scattered. Violation notices that once brought fear now trampled underfoot by neighbors who stomped and shredded them. Karen lunged forward, shrieking, "Stop, stop, those are official documents." But no one listened. The old man from the corner bent down, picked up one of the notices, and tore it in half in front of her face. "Official nothing," he said, his voice like steel. "Your reign is finished." Karen stumbled back, her face pale, sweat dripping, her eyes filling with tears as the chant grew louder. "No more HOA, no more HOA." She screamed again, high and shrill, "You'll regret this, all of you. You'll beg for me when the mess begins." But her words were drowned by cheers, by laughter, by voices finally free. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, clawing at the torn papers, trying to piece them together like a broken authority. But the neighbors only laughed harder, filming every second. Her empire of fear collapsing in front of her eyes. She looked up at the man, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "This isn't over," she hissed, but he only shook his head slowly, his voice calm. "Yes, Karen, it is." And with that he turned away, the crowd cheering louder. Karen staggered to her feet, her body trembling, and stumbled back to her car, the chants chasing her down the street, her hands shaking as she gripped the wheel, her tires spitting gravel as she sped off, her shadow finally broken. And, for the first time in years, Maple Hollow felt free. That night the Hollow was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Laughter rolled down the street where once there had only been silence and whispers. Grills were lit in front yards. Neighbors brought out chairs. Children played in the gravel where only fear had lived before. The man sat on his porch watching it all with a calm smile, his son standing beside him in uniform, his wife on the phone finishing the last of the paperwork that would make sure Karen's false report was logged for the sheriff's office. The neighbors drifted closer, one by one, offering thanks, shaking hands, telling their own stories of how Karen had fined them, bullied them, embarrassed them, and how they had been too afraid to stand up until now. And every time the man only nodded quietly, saying, "You were never her prisoners, you just forgot you were free." The words spread like a spark, repeated from yard to yard until they became the truth the whole street carried. Meanwhile, Karen's house at the far end of the block sat dark, her curtains closed tight, her car gone from the driveway. Some whispered she had packed in the night. Others whispered she was hiding inside, too ashamed to face anyone. But no one feared her return. No one waited for her knock. She was gone in all the ways that mattered, her power broken, her voice drowned, her empire reduced to scraps of paper that children had stomped into the dirt. As the night grew deeper, the man stood, walking slowly into the middle of the street, his son at his side, his wife joining him. He raised the leather folder in his hand, the one filled with deeds, with truth, with the weight Karen had always denied, and his voice carried through the quiet crowd, steady and calm. She ruled with lies, she ruled with fear, but fear is gone now. This street is ours. This community is ours, not hers, not anyone's to abuse. Remember this night. Remember that no one owns you, no one has power over you unless you let them. The neighbors erupted in cheers, clapping, stomping feet against the gravel, chanting again, "No more HOA, no more HOA." Their voices rolled like thunder into the night sky. Some wept, some laughed, all of them free. The man lowered the folder and pulled from his pocket the useless master key Karen had dropped. He held it high for all to see. The same key that she had claimed could open any door, the symbol of her false control. And then he threw it into the fire pit at the center of the gathering. The flames hissed and sparked, the metal glowing red as the neighbors roared louder. Children jumped and cheered. The badge on his son's chest caught the firelight, glinting bright, a symbol of real authority, the kind built on law and truth, not fear. His wife placed a hand on his arm and whispered, "It's over." And he nodded, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders completely at last. The stars above shone clear. The night air smelled of smoke and freedom, and for the first time in years Maple Hollow was not just a neighborhood. It was a community again. A place where people belonged to themselves, where Karen's shadow no longer lingered, where the cabin stood safe and the bridge unchallenged. The man looked across the faces of his neighbors, all lit by fire and hope, and he knew this was the end of one story and the beginning of another, a better one built not on fear but on freedom. And as the chant rose again, echoing off the hills, "No more HOA, no more HOA," he smiled faintly, steady as stone. Because the tyrant was gone, the people were free, and his cabin was finally, truly, his.